of voluntary initiatives and good work by a range of charities, and I commend the work of the Scottish charity Beautiful Inside and Out and the amount of money that's been raised. This does remain a serious issue for millions of people. I know the Scottish Government has been addressing this with their Respect for All approach. We are funded the UK Safer Internet Centre. That's providing guidance for schools. But this is an issue we should all take very seriously, and the Government will continue to work on this.
Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on cyberbullying and indeed on the terrible tragedy yesterday in Strasbourg? Mr. Speaker, we were promised strong and stable. We were promised a vote on the Brexit deal. But this Prime Minister can't even do her own job because of the Tory civil war. This government, Mr. Speaker, is an embarrassment. Christmas is just 2 weeks away. Will the Prime Minister bring forward her meaningful vote on the Brexit deal next week?
No. As I say, there are discussions that we're having with European leaders and others, and those discussions will continue. I think what matters is that they are in no doubt about the strength of feeling about this issue on the duration of the backstop in this House. They are in no doubt about the strength of feeling in this House that that should be addressed in a way that has legal force, and that is what we are discussing and continuing to negotiate with the European Union. As I said earlier, the date of the deferred vote on this, the date of the debate on this, will be announced in due course in the normal way.
Ian Blackford. Mr. Speaker, that is contemptuous of Parliament. Parliament voted for a meaningful vote. We should be having the vote, and it should be happening next week. This government is a farce. The Tory party is in chaos. The Prime Minister is a disgrace with their actions. The reality is that people across Scotland and the UK are seeing this today. Prime Minister, take responsibility, do the right thing, resign.
Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he claims that he makes the remarks he does about the deferring the vote. But of course it is precisely because I have listened and colleagues in government have listened to the views of people across this House that we are pursuing this issue further with the European Union. That is being respectful of the views that have been raised in this House.
Mark Palsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many businesses up and down the country have put their future plans on hold, waiting for us here in Parliament to agree our future trading relationship with our biggest and closest neighbour. Does the Prime Minister agree that their interests and those of their workers and their suppliers and the country as a whole are best served by concluding the agreement with the remaining 27 and on this side supporting her in the vote this evening?
I thank my honourable friend for his comments and agree with him, particularly that we need to ensure that we do not increase uncertainty and create more uncertainty. And the public voted to leave the EU. They want us to secure a deal that delivers on that result. And we shouldn't risk handing control of the Brexit negotiations to opposition MPs in Parliament, because that would mean risking delaying Brexit or even stopping Brexit. None of that would be in the national interest, so I think we need to get on and deliver a good Brexit for the country.
Lily Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I stood for election, I vowed not to vote for any Brexit deal that was not in the best interests of Lewisham West and Penge. By pulling the Brexit vote, the Prime Minister must now concede that her deal is doomed. The House and her own party appear to have no confidence in her. But will she have confidence in the people and give them a say with a people's vote, including an option to remain in the EU?
Can I say to the honourable lady, we have deferred the vote on the agreement and on the issue that she raised about putting the vote back to the people. Can I say to her, as I said to the first questioner, the honourable member from Bristol, and have said in many occasions in this House, this House put its faith in the votes of the people of this country when we gave them the referendum, decided to give them the referendum in 2016. People voted to leave the European Union. It is now our duty to deliver on that.
Wardener.
Mr. Speaker, this House has a duty to make sure that the next generation live better lives tomorrow than we live today. So how does my right honourable friend respond to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists audit that found that 3/4 of the hundreds of babies who die or suffer brain damage each year could be saved by better care? And what steps is the government taking to ensure that every expectant mother and unborn baby receives appropriate monitoring?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising what I know is a very important issue and one that is close to the hearts, I know, of many members of this House. And every death or injury of a child is a tragedy. And we have a commitment to halving rates of stillbirth, neonatal deaths and brain injuries after birth by 2025. And that's supported by system-wide action under our National Maternity Safety Strategy. We're increasing midwifery training places by 25%. We're investing millions of pounds in training for staff and in new safety equipment to ensure that the NHS can provide world-class care for mothers and babies. But we recognise that this is something that we need to ensure that we continue to do all we can, and I can give my honourable friend the reassurance we will do.
Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As she reflects on her premiership, can I ask the Prime Minister which of the following misjudgments she most regrets? Laying down red lines before the Brexit talks had even begun? Wasting precious negotiating time on a general election, or consistently failing to face down the hardliners on her own benches and reach out to forge a consensus in this House and the country?
I'll tell the honourable gentleman the judgment that was the right one. It was to accept the vote of the people in the referendum, to deliver on the vote of the people in the referendum, and deliver a good Brexit for the future of this country.
Damian Moore.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are the backbone of my Southport constituency. The Chancellor announced in the budget a revitalisation fund for our high streets. Can I ask my right honourable friend when that will be made available, as it will prove a vital lifeline to my constituency because of the anti-business policies of Labour-controlled Sefton Council?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, can I thank him for highlighting the help that we've announced for the High Street, and he's absolutely right. The Leader of the Opposition may stand up and claim to be interested in businesses and small businesses, but so often we see the action of Labour councils up and down the country actually doing exactly the opposite. We have provided £675 million in the Future High Streets Fund, so that plans can be made to help to make high streets and town centres fit for the future, and we'll be publishing a prospectus for the fund shortly.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm which is worse, no deal or no Brexit?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think it is important that we do deliver on Brexit for the people of this country. I believe that we should do that with a good deal with the European Union. I believe that is what we've negotiated, and I do believe, as my honourable friend from a sedentary position, that actually the worst thing for this country would be a Labour government.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, at a time of grave national crisis on an issue which we all agree of its huge importance to future generations, can my right honourable friend think of anything more unhelpful, irrelevant and irresponsible than for the Conservative Party to embark on weeks of a Conservative leadership election?
My right honourable and learned friend has raised an important issue, and I think it is the impact that those weeks of that campaign would have on the decision that the House has to take and the decision that we have to take as a country in relation to leaving the European Union, because there is no doubt that would go beyond the legislated date of the 21st of January, and it would mean that were a new leader to come in, that one of the first things they would have to do would be to either extend Article 50 or rescind Article 50, and that would mean either delaying or stopping Brexit.
Siobhan McDonough.
Away from the madness of her own MPs, can I welcome the Prime Minister back to the real world? Last week, Marion was forced to queue outside St George's Hospital Tooting with a badly infected left leg because the A&E was full. Knowing my constituents, Can the Prime Minister tell me how long will that queue be should the local NHS get its way and move the A&E at St Helier Hospital to leafy, wealthy Belmont?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, obviously I'm very concerned to hear the case that she has raised of her constituent. Decisions, it's absolutely right, the decisions on delivery of services should be taken by local clinicians because they are best placed to assess local need. Now, I understand that what the local NHS is doing is looking at the very considerable challenges that are being faced by Epsom and St Helier Trust and looking at options for future services, but these are at a very early stage, and knowing the Honourable Lady as I do from past experience when we shared both sat on Merton Council together, I'm sure that she will continue to raise the concerns of her local constituents, and I would encourage her to do so.
Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shortly, 34,000 copies of Your Money Matters, a free personal finance textbook, will wing their way to every secondary school in the land. Will my right honourable friend join me in saying thank you to its funder, the broadcaster Martin Lewis, Young Money, the organisation behind it, the APPG for financial education and young people, which I chair, and not least the Department of Education for making this fantastic resource for our young people happen.
Yes. Can I say to my honourable friend, I think he's done a very important thing today by raising people's awareness of this booklet, which I think will be extremely important for secondary schools. I think this is a really good piece of work. I congratulate all those who are involved, and I know this is an issue that my honourable friend, through his chairmanship of the APPG, has taken very seriously, has been championing for a long time, and I hope he's pleased to see this piece of work being done. I'm sure he'll want to carry on to ensure there is that financial education taking place so that young people are prepared for their future lives.
Mary Cray.
Mr. Speaker, the economy is stalling, business investment is falling, and we have the grotesque...
Order. I couldn't care less what somebody chuntering from a sedentary position says is or isn't the truth. What I care about is that the Honourable Lady will not be shouted down any more than any other member in this place will be shouted down. Be quiet and listen. Mary Cray.
The economy is stalling, business investment is plummeting, and we have the grotesque spectacle of Tory MPs putting party interest before the public interest. If she survives tonight's vote, will she finally rule out no deal, face down her hard Brexiteers, let this place vote down her deal and put it back to the public in a people's vote?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, the way to, if she wants to ensure no deal, the way to ensure no deal is to agree a deal. That is the best way to ensure that there is not no deal. That's the way to ensure it is not no deal. But she talks about the economy. She talks about the economy. Employment is at a record high. Wages are growing, and we've had 23 consecutive quarters of growth, the longest run in the G7. That's a balanced approach to the economy. That's Conservatives delivering for the people of this country.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Can I ask my right honourable friend to take her mind back to September 97, when a referendum was held in Wales. The result of that referendum was 50.3% in favour of an assembly and 49.7% against, on a turnout of 50%. Nobody questioned whether we should accept the referendum. Does that hold any future reference for us?
Can I thank my right honourable friend? He's made a very important point. And he's made a very important point about the principle that was accepted at that time, which was however small the margin in the vote, it was the overall result of the vote that should be accepted and acted on.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I hosted an event to raise money for Radio Hallam FM's Mission Christmas, a charity doing fantastic work helping children in need in my constituency, and for the local food banks. Indeed, many of the 41% of children living in poverty in my community will really need help this Christmas. What message does the Prime Minister have for those who are working hard to make ends meet, but will find themselves forced to rely on food banks for their family's Christmas meal and Mission Christmas for their children's presents?
Can I first of all, and obviously, say how good it is that Radio Hallam has been doing this work. There are many charities up and down the country who do work to ensure that they can provide a better Christmas for many children than they would otherwise have. That is important. We don't want to see people be relying on food banks, but the way to ensure that people are able to provide for themselves without having to rely on food banks is to ensure that people are in work, that work is well paid, and that work always pays, which is exactly what we're doing.
Maggie Throop.
Residents in Arawash are clear that we need a strong government to deliver on Brexit and on the domestic agenda. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's time for us to unite on these benches, as the real threat to our great nation is the party opposite in the Labour government?
Can I echo the comments that my honourable friend has made? I think that many members of the public want us to get on with Brexit and actually ensure that we are delivering for them on the domestic agenda, like the record number of new homes that we've seen being built, the best number ever, bar 1 year in the last 31 years. It's getting onto that domestic agenda that is important. To do that, we must unite as a party and bring our country back together again. She's absolutely right. The greatest threat to the jobs and livelihoods and futures of her constituents and constituents around the United Kingdom would be a Labour government.
In Fletcher.
Last month, in my constituency, a 16-year-old boy was tragically killed in a knife attack. This came as knife crime has almost doubled in Coventry over the last 5 years. I know that some good multi-agency work is happening in this field, but does the Prime Minister still think we have enough police officers on our streets to be able to fight crime and the fear of crime?
Can I first of all extend my condolences to the family of the constituent that the Honourable Lady has referred to, who has suffered from this terrible attack. Can I also say that obviously there is a concern, and I recognise the concern about the rise in violent crime. It's why the government has produced the Serious Violence Strategy. The Serious Violence Task Force has people from across the House sitting on that, across party basis sitting on that. It's why we've given extra powers to the police to tackle knife crime. We're giving that through the Offensive Weapons Bill. And we've strengthened firearms control through the Policing and Crime Act. And in relation to this isn't just about police action. Actually, we've announced the £200 million Youth Endowment Fund, which will be about helping to work with young people who otherwise might find themselves drawn into gangs and the use of knives to prevent them from doing that and to prevent these crimes from taking place in the first place.
Sir David Evanett.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend share my concern and my constituents' concerns about the further delays and increased costs of Crossrail and the failures of TfL and the Labour Mayor of London?
Well, I absolutely share my honourable friend's concerns and his constituents' concerns, and indeed my constituency is affected also by the delay of Crossrail. And yes, we should recognise the role that TfL and the Labour Mayor of London has played in this. We want to see Crossrail. It's going to be a benefit to my honourable friend's constituents and mine, and the Labour Mayor needs to get his finger out on this.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1997, the British Prime Minister issued an apology to the people of Ireland for the historic role in the Great Famine, a famine that saw 1 million people died and 1 million people displaced from their homeland. That sent out a powerful and an important message. Will the Prime Minister condemn any notion, any suggestion that food shortages in Ireland will be used to strengthen Britain's negotiating hands during the Brexit negotiations?
Yes, can I say to the honourable gentleman, I am happy to absolutely give that assurance. We would not use that issue in any sense in the negotiating strategy. We want to work with the Irish government to ensure that we are providing a good Brexit for the UK, a good Brexit for Ireland, and I believe that will be a good Brexit for the European Union.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents in Erdby has written to me to say, I voted for Brexit and I urge you to support our Prime Minister unreservedly and vote for this Brexit deal. Another one in Great Glen says, The Prime Minister has done a terrific job in trying circumstances. The headbangers from all sides and the supine attitude of the Labour Party has meant she's had an impossible job, but she's done so well. And finally, a third from Saddington writes, I'm an employer of 30 people in the Harborough constituency. To vote against the deal will cause political chaos and open the door to the worst possible scenario for this country, a far-left Labour government. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that my constituents have got a lot more common sense than the members opposite who want to stop Brexit and fundamentally damage our democracy?
Mr. Speaker, this can be an occasion where I give a very short answer. Yes.
Rachel Masco.
Mr. Speaker, the self-serving chaos unleashed on this Parliament this week is emblematic of the way this government have consistently treated the people of our country. In the light of the Prime Minister's conduct, the pound has fallen 2% over the last 48 hours. Her budget's equivalent of running the entire NHS for 6 weeks.
Yes.
Does the Prime Minister believe that this is a price worth paying for her Brexit deal?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, she talks about what the government is doing for the NHS. It is this government that is establishing a 10-year plan for the sustainability of the National Health Service, and it is this government that is putting the biggest cash boots in its history into the National Health Service to ensure it is there for all our constituents now and in the future.
Andrew Selous.
Does the Prime Minister agree that we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to our police officers, prison officers and probation staff who are in the front line of keeping us all safe, the first duty of any government? In that regard, could I please ask the Prime Minister to take a close and personal interest in the 2019-20 police funding settlement?
First of all, can I agree with my honourable friend? I think we do owe an enormous debt of gratitude to all those who are on the front line, putting themselves potentially at risk for us. That is police officers, but he's also referenced prison officers and I think probation officers he referenced as well. And I can assure him that I have been looking at, with the Home Secretary, as he has at the 2019-20 police funding settlement.
And Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plotters behind her know that any replacement Prime Minister would face exactly the same party arithmetic and exactly the same deadlock on Brexit. This deadlock can only be changed by going back to the people. The Times newspaper today also said it's her only chance of saving her job and saving her deal. So can she tell the House what exactly is she afraid of?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, the issue is that this House overwhelmingly voted to give the choice to the British people as to whether or not to leave the European Union. The British people chose to leave the European Union, and I strongly believe that it is the duty of members of this House to deliver on that vote.
Nolan Rake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What does the Prime Minister consider to be most important? Playing parliamentary parlour games in this place, or protecting jobs and businesses by going back to the negotiating table and thrashing out a deal that will pass through this House?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think it is in the interests of employers, in the interests of people whose jobs are at stake in this, to make sure that we get a good deal with the European Union, and that's why it's important that I was in Europe yesterday and will continue to be in Europe, doing exactly as he says, negotiating the deal that I believe can get the support of this House to ensure that we can move forward and deliver a good Brexit.
Finally, Sir Vincent Cable.
Does the Prime Minister judge that it is more welcome or more appropriate to face a no-confidence motion from her backbenchers or from the Leader of the Opposition?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that is not. Obviously, we have one of those which is going to take place. What I think is important for everybody in this House is to recognise that we have, I believe, a solemn duty to deliver on the result of the referendum in 2016. I believe the best way of doing that is with a good deal, with a good Brexit deal with the European Union that protects jobs and honours the referendum, and I believe that's the deal we've negotiated.
Order. Order. I say to the honourable gentleman, the member for Solihull, to whose mellifluous tones we listened only a few moments ago, that I'm very happy to entertain a point of order, but that should come after the urgent question. So I'm sure that the honourable gentleman will retain the thrust of it in his head, and he will share it with the House in due course. We will await that with eager anticipation, but not until we've had the urgent question from Emily Thornberry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. And to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs to make a statement on his department's funding of the Institute for Statecraft's Integrity Initiative.
State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Minister Sir Duncan.
Aft is an independent UK-based charity whose work seeks to improve governance and enhance national security. It runs a project called the Integrity Initiative, which is working to counter disinformation overseas by bringing together groups of experts to analyse and discuss the problem posed by Russian disinformation. The government is funding this initiative with nearly £2 million this financial year. That funding covers its activity outside the UK, and it does not fund any activity within the UK, nor does it fund the management of the Integrity Initiative's social media account. Recent reports that Foreign Office funding has been used to support party political activity in the UK are therefore wholly untrue.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I thank the Minister of State for his opening remarks. Let me make it clear at the outset that I have no interest today in debating the purpose of the Integrity Initiative in countering the very real threat of interference in Western democracies and the spread of disinformation by the Russian state. If that debate needs to happen about how that objective is best pursued, it is best for another day. The issue before us today is a much more simple and more fundamental one, which is it is a cardinal rule of public life in our country that official resources should not be used for political purposes, a rule we saw symbolised this very morning when the Prime Minister delivered her statement outside Downing Street with the usual government coat of arms removed from her lectern because of the political nature of her statement. And there is, I'm afraid, absolutely no doubt that the publicly funded Integrity Initiative has broken that rule on a repeated basis by using its Twitter accounts to disseminate articles attacking the integrity of Conservative and Labour officials, of Conservative peers, and, on a repeated basis, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition. I greatly welcome the statement that the Minister of State made on Monday, saying that he totally condemned that kind of behaviour by a publicly funded organisation, and that it must not only stop, but that he wanted to know, and I quote, why on earth it happened in the first place. And that is doubly important in this case, Mr. Speaker, because the Integrity Initiative's use of Twitter as a tool for disseminating information has not been a fringe activity, but an integral part of their applications for Foreign Office funding over the past 2 years. Indeed, the budget for their agreed objective to increase reporting in the media and expand the impact of their website and Twitter account amounted to £270,000 in the current financial year. And in the list of key deliverables they promised the Foreign Office this year, they stated explicitly that one of their instruments of delivery will be, and I quote, their 600-plus Twitter followers, including influential players. So in the light of all of that, I hope the Minister of State can answer some more questions today to explain, as he put, why on earth that misuse of public funds has taken place. So first, can I ask him whether, given it was an integral part of the activity for which they were being funded, were Foreign Office officials monitoring the Integrity Initiative's social media output? If so, why did they not flag up concerns to him about their dissemination of personal attacks? And if not, why was this misuse of public funds going unchecked? Second, does the current funding agreement governing the Integrity Initiative make clear that its use of funds and its public statements must comply with Cabinet Office rules? And finally, Mr. Speaker, if the government intends to renew that funding for the next financial year, what arrangements and agreements will be put in place to ensure that nothing of this sort ever happens again?
Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of regret that the Right Honourable Lady did not listen to the answer that I gave a moment ago. Let me explain to the House what has been going on. The Institute for Statecraft was hacked several weeks ago, and numerous documents were published and amplified by Kremlin news channels. The Russian state media campaign which followed it fits with a wider pattern of Russian disinformation against the UK. This campaign's objective is clear. It is yet another example of Russian disinformation intended to confuse audiences and discredit an organisation which is working independently to tackle the threat of disinformation. The current Russian disinformation activity is precisely the sort of disinformation that this project is designed to counter. It's regrettable, but perhaps rather unsurprising, that some have been fooled and have used it to make accusations about British politics in exactly the way this malign activity might have hoped for. While this is going on in the UK, the sort of activity which we do fund is doing its utmost to counter Russian disinformation overseas, which is undermining democracy and its institutions ever more widely across the world. The FCO has given a grant to the Institute of Statecraft this financial year of nearly £2 million. Our agreement, written into the contract with the Institute, specifically states that the grant must not be used to support activity intended to influence or attempt to influence the UK Parliament, government or political parties. We have not seen any evidence that the Integrity Initiative have breached this obligation, and the accusation that government money has been used for domestic political purposes is utterly unfounded, and I say once again to the Right Honourable Lady that no Foreign Office funding is used for their UK domestic activity, and she can look at me as aghast as she likes, but the money that comes from the Foreign Office is used for activity overseas, and she should accept that as the and if she doesn't accept it, she should say in terms what she is accusing me of, because that would be a breach of the forms of the House.
You know what you've done.
Mr. Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would clearly be concerning if any Foreign Office money was being used for party political activities, but I welcome the Minister's reassurances. Would he confirm, though, that an investigation has been launched to see what has happened, and that when a proper independent investigation brought proper conclusions out, he would take action on them?
Perhaps one of the accurate things the Right Honourable Lady says, that when I was interviewed on Radio 4 and this was sprung on me, I said I would look into it straight away. And I did. And I have established the facts. And I am satisfied that our money does not go to fund any kind of UK domestic activity. Stephen? Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I've been accused of speaking rubbish by the Honourable Lady, and she should mark her words carefully before she bellows untruths at me across the House.
Order. Nobody should bellow across the House from either side. I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Minister of State, is very well able to look after himself. The word rubbish, sadly, is used relatively frequently in the House, and it's certainly not unparliamentary. It is a matter of taste rather than of order, and I'm glad to see the Right Honourable Gentleman breaking out into a smile, but it would be more seemly if colleagues would conduct these exchanges in a slightly more restrained fashion. I look now to that end, in hope and possibly in anticipation, to Mr. Stephen Gethins.
Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start on that? And what I would like to put on the record is that there are a number of FCO-funded NGOs who do extraordinary work in the most difficult of circumstances. Before I came to this place, I worked in the South Caucasus and the Western Balkans, where many of those organisations do extraordinary work, and they deserve our support for doing that. But what they deserve more than anything else is they need to know that we have full openness and transparency from the Foreign Office. Our most powerful tool against any Russian misinformation is that we have respect for the rule of law, the democratic process, and critically, transparency. We owe it to them who are working in these organisations, and I know that the Minister will be well aware of many of those who work in very difficult circumstances, who themselves find themselves at the hard edge of Russian disinformation campaigns. So, can I ask that we need to have confidence in our democratic process, There should be no undermining of politicians, be they Labour, SNP, Conservative or anybody else. Can I further ask that what further steps he will take to ensure that impartiality and integrity goes to the very heart of all funding coming from the Foreign Office? And I'm sure, and I hope he'll take the tone of the question that I'm putting to him, and I'm sure he'll agree with me that those who are doing difficult work in difficult conflict environments deserve the full support of this House and know that they've got the back of the Foreign Office as well on that.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman both for what he has asked, but also the tone in which he's asked it. He has experience of this, and I share pretty well everything he's just said. What this Integrity Initiative is endeavouring to do in its activity abroad is to deliver exactly the sort of transparency in order to counter fake news and disinformation in the way that I think the honourable member and indeed all of us would hope. Indeed, the Right Honourable Lady in her opening remarks said that she would support that sort of activity. What's more, this is a charity which is actually incorporated in Scotland, and so it's subject to the Scottish charitable regulator, and that kind of non-partisan activity is required. What they have done within the UK is that they have some automatic retweeting of stories that relate to Russia. That, of course, in some occasions, mentions the honourable gentleman. It could equally mention the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition. It could equally mention a Conservative, as indeed it has done on many occasions, and it has been judged to be no more than a non-partisan repetition of stories that relate to Russia.
Sir Desmond Swain.
I'm reassured to know that we're taking on Russian misinformation. I'm right to be, aren't I?
I say to my right honourable friend, yes, he is right to be, and the whole House should appreciate that this is an ever-increasing challenge, and it's one that we need to meet in the cyber field as we do in the information field, and that's what we're doing. And again, if the right honourable gentleman says from a sedentary position in a united way, yes, and she could add to that unity by recognising the truth of what I've said instead of denying it in her normal way.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Minister said that the Institute for Statecraft was hacked several weeks ago. Could you just clarify for the House today whether that hacking extended to the Twitter account of the Integrity Initiative, which has been retweeting articles that undoubtedly are critical of my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Opposition's policy?
The answer is I don't know, but if it's a Twitter account, it's publicly available anyway. So it's the information that was not publicly available that was hacked, and I deplore that hack, but that is what is now being used by Russian-inspired sources in order to create the sort of encounters we're witnessing here today.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first time I think I've come across an accusation from a Labour Party spokesperson that retweeting a New Statesman article was something that meant, quote, smears against Labour, unquote. But if it is the case that there is an implication of this, despite the fact that the government's support, financial support, has nothing to do with its UK activities, would my right honourable friend reassure members today that if there was any evidence found that the Institute is involved in efforts to discredit the party opposite, then he would unequivocally condemn such behaviour?
Yes, if our funding were being used for that, then yes, I would, and the contract would be withdrawn. But I hear again from the Labour front bench an accusation that I have categorically denied today, that Foreign Office funding is paying for UK Twitter activity and the management of their account. It is not. And I would say to the honourable gentleman on the front bench who's been shouting at me that he should withdraw this accusation, because I have spoken in honesty to the House and he should recognise it as such.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Russia has been pushing the boundaries with its international interference and international disruption. We've seen incidents like Salisbury and the Ukraine. Our defences against cyber attack will be depleted if we leave the European Union. So can he tell the House what plans have been drawn up to increase the skills and resources to counter such cyber attacks in the future?
We are one of the leaders of cyber defence and indeed assist other countries in learning the techniques that are necessary to protect against the sort of hacking we're discussing in part today. So yes, I am confident, and I have enormous confidence in the professional competence of our officials in defending this country about cyber attacks and malign cyber activity.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
How sure are we that it was the Russians behind this hack? And if we are sure, what are we going to do by way of response?
Well, one of the responses, of course, is to counter in the sort of way we are doing in this House today. Unfortunately, I don't have as many allies across the chamber as I would like to have in so doing. We know the origin of the attack because it shares exactly the same pattern that we have seen in previous attacks.
Mike Gates.
Mr. Speaker, the Russians are engaged in hybrid cyber warfare against our country and many others. We seem to play by different rules to them. What are we doing to counter the nefarious activities of the Russian propaganda channel RT and Sputnik?
We do indeed play by the rules because we have integrity in upholding the rule of law and playing within or acting within the confines of our own law. That, some might say, puts us at a disadvantage because when other people break the rules, they try and get the better of us. But we have strong cyber defences, and the kind of activity that the Integrity Initiative is doing is designed to counter the sort of activity the Honourable Gentleman rightly refers to. And it saddens me, it dismays me that I have not got the full support of the front bench opposite in defending what we are doing.
Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the absolute clarity of the Minister's statement and his refuting of these allegations. And I also welcome the work of the Institute for Statecraft. Does the Minister agree with me, though, that we need to double down on this work? Because the reality is that the DCMS Select Committee has shown the danger to our democracy, our very way of life, through Russian disinformation. And frankly, we should not be falling into their traps and aping the sort of paranoia that we've seen in the coverage of this, in the likes, let's say, of the Canary and those types of publications.
I fully agree with my honourable friend. We should not be taken for a sucker, and if we allow malign forces to divide us and then try and rule over us, then that is what will have happened to us. And again, I urge the front bench of Her Majesty's opposition to appreciate that this is a proper part of government activity within the rules, according to a contract, and it is really, I think, behoven on them to accept the assurances that have been so clearly and openly given today.
Tom Brake.
Speaker, on the subject of allegations of Russian influence, could I ask the Minister whether he's aware of concerns about some activities of peers in the House of Lords who are representing Russian companies, including, for instance, Lord Truscott, who's the remunerated chairman of the advisory board of Russian Gold Fund, which is a private equity investment fund about which it is possible to find out precisely nothing in terms of who is investing it and where the money is going.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's for me to comment on the propriety or otherwise of any member of the House of Lords. They, of course, have their own standard rules, and it is for that House to apply those rules as it sees fit.
Bob Blackman.
Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for the robust way that he's answered these questions. Can he also make sure that the Institute reviews its editorial policy so that we counter Russian fake news and disinformation, but also do not fall foul of criticising UK politicians?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for asking that question, because I'm very happy to say yes to it, because I can assure him and the House, through you, Mr. Speaker, that when it comes to challenging officials on any issue, I do so very, very robustly in order to try and establish the highest standards of activity in the Foreign Office in everything we do. And therefore, in response to this, I have certainly been grilling officials to find out exactly what's happening, and I have asked them to engage with the Institute of Statecraft to look at their editorial policy in order to make sure that there is and will remain an absolute clear division between domestic activity which they do under their charitable rules and any overseas activity which we fund, which of course is subject to the contract we have.
Free to do it.
Chris Bryant.
I completely support any attempt to deal with misinformation campaigns, whether they originate from Russia or Saudi Arabia or the hard right in the United States of America or Syria or, for that matter, in Catalonia last year. So I want to make sure that a project like this really works, but it's not going to have the confidence of the whole nation unless we're able to see some changes in the way it operates in this particular case. And I would have more confidence if the government were to engage in the kind of investigation that is ongoing in Russia, in the United States of America, into Russian involvement in democratic processes in this country. Why can't we have that investigation?
Well, again, that's an area where, there is an enormous amount of work going on in government where I think I share the Right Honourable Gentleman's concerns. I think we see all sorts of social media activity, and we've seen, I think, completely verified activity of Russian intervention in democratic processes, such as the election in Montenegro and perhaps the referendum in Catalonia. So that is, if you like, an addition to the full spectrum of activity which we're specifically discussing in this question this morning.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, can my right honourable friend explain why the government still is not against expelling or in favour of expelling the Russian Federation from the Council of Europe? Because the Russian Federation is in breach of all its international obligations, and yet the government isn't doing what it could do, which is expel it from the Council of Europe.
No, I understand what my honourable friend is saying, but I think a matter of that sort is for the Council of Europe, and the parliamentary representatives are, I know, discussing that. What Russia has done is not pay its dues, and I know that the question is, of course, being discussed on a regular basis.
Jenny Chapman.
Mr. Speaker, can I just observe that the honourable gentleman does seem to be rather affronted by the anger felt on this side of the House, and particularly by my front bench colleagues on this issue, and he really needn't to. He ought to be sharing in that anger. Does he think that the investigation that he's undertaken so far is sufficient, or does he plan any further inquiry into this matter? Does he think he's done enough?
Well, I do not share in the anger, because I think the accusations that are being made are both misplaced and have been categorically denied, and right honourable, in particular, ladies and gentlemen in this House, should accept the assurance on that basis.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted the Foreign Office are spending money trying to counter the disinformation and fake news that's coming from not just Russia, but as my honourable friend from the Rhondda said, all over the world. But can I just ask the Minister what discussions or comments he's given to this organisation to impress upon them that their domestic use of their Twitter account, whether right or wrong, may be undermining what they're trying to do internationally?
I actually think that is a perfectly fair question about whether their domestic activity somehow taints the legitimate and Foreign Office funded international activity. What I resent very deeply is members of this House not accepting the assurances that are given that Foreign Office funding does not pay for that domestic activity. What I would say in its defence is I think that all it does is forward from what are already open website articles anything that happens to mention Russia. It is deemed to have done so on a non-partisan basis, so inasmuch as it may occasionally mention the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, it could also do so for anyone on the Conservative side. And that is the distinction that ought to be accepted and understood, particularly on the front bench here. But I have undertaken to conduct exactly that sort of review, because I think it's very important that the activity we're doing is clear and distinct and not in any way muddled with the sort of activity the Honourable Gentleman is describing.
Ian C. Lucas.
Speaker, can the Right Honourable Gentleman clarify when it was that the Foreign Office became aware that the account had been hacked, and whether that was before the press coverage or whether it was after it?
I suspect it's probably the case, but I'm partly speculating here, that the Foreign Office knew fairly quickly. It didn't necessarily come to ministers straight away. Probably it wasn't deemed to be that serious. But these things happen, unfortunately, all too frequently at the moment.
Peter Grant.
According to documents that the company themselves have filed with Companies House, one of the directors describes his own occupation as senior civil servant. Now, it may be that that's his former rather than his present occupation, but a simple glance at his career indicates that he's held a number of senior and presumably sensitive posts, both within Her Majesty's government and within NATO. Can the Minister tell us, first of all, was the government aware until now that this individual held that directorship? Was the government involved in any way in nominating or recommending him for that position? And finally, what approval or authorisation, if any, did the individual require before he became a director of what, as the Minister has said, is an independent company limited by guarantee?
No. Give the honourable gentleman who asked 3 questions, but I'm sure the Minister will stay.
I believe I would be right in saying that perhaps the reason for this is that NATO are also a funder of this activity, and therefore I imagine that the name to which the honourable gentleman refers has a connection with NATO. Should this, however, be inaccurate, I will, of course, write to him straight away.
Leila Moran.
Speaker. In the end, this is about trust, and in a recent parliamentary question to do with public money to fund social media ads to promote the Brexit deal, I asked the government if they would place the contents of these ads in the library for us all to see. Unfortunately, this request was declined. Given that this is public money, does the Minister agree that in order to ensure public trust and transparency, that the content of any ads paid for by public money, including the audiences, should be published as a matter of course centrally?
The Foreign Office funding for the Integrity Initiative doesn't really pay for advertisement, so I don't think that's really relevant to the question we're asking today. If I may, Mr. Speaker, just referring to the earlier question about when we knew about the hack, we first knew about it on the 23rd of November.
Chris Williamson.
I think, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is burying his head in the sand. The fact is that this organisation has received over £2 million of public money in just over 18 months. And it is a matter of fact that it has been engaging in a smear campaign against the Leader of the Opposition and the Labour Party, and has taken credit for derailing the appointment of Pedro Baños as the Director of the Homeland Security in Spain. This is a democratic outrage, and will the Minister therefore agree to an independent inquiry into the activities of this organisation?
Said on many occasions this morning, Mr. Speaker, what the honourable gentleman says about domestic activities smearing the Leader of the Opposition is utterly untrue.
Hugh Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister now make it clear when he knew, how long was it hacked, and what has he done about it?
I've sort of answered all those questions already this morning. I first knew about this when there was a report in the Sunday papers. I answered a question sprung on me on the Today programme at 7 o'clock yesterday, after which I sought all the facts which have equipped me truthfully to answer this urgent question today.
There's no idea.
Martin Whitfield.
Mr. Speaker, does it not concern the Minister that the internal checks within the FCO have led them to sending cheques for £2 million to a derelict mill in Scotland as an address for this charity?
Well, that's not the cleverest of questions. It was incorporated in Scotland, most of its activities in the UK, and all payments are channelled properly to where it belongs.
Sweeney.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of State tell us a bit more about the Foreign Office's counter-disinformation?
I think I'm here till what? Till midnight? Yeah, I think so. What fun? Yes. Yeah. Tapped off the code.
Yes, that's the second percentage. Unfortunately, we haven't got a proper score yet, so it's just...
Oh, I've got a prospect.
Have you got a prospect? Not really.
I think once you click this, yeah. Oh, I think Steve Hawkins coming down to relieve me, but I'm asking, is he relieving me for good, or is he just coming down for business? There's nothing going on down, is there? To be honest, but in saying that, I mean, I would have thought that he's just been doing everything from green.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just... Yeah, see how it goes. Just undo that. Sorry. Sometime in the past. Yes. Two of those. And then when I stand up, it will all be chaos.
Have you? That's what I was doing before, wasn't it? Like, moving everything in and then just doing bits and bobs before. No, that's just so good. This weekend on work, very often Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. But yeah, no, I'm off tomorrow at the moment. Yeah, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah, I can't even take it off either because I'm taking Ryan. Yeah, I know. Oh yeah. Wally got a play. Yeah. Idiot. Why did he not say? You said to him that he was Yeah. No, well, it sort of is in a way because like he should have said to the bloke straight away. I was going to wait for them to come and when you've been saying, yeah. Joe, you know what you want to do? Just say to him, can I have his number? While you ring him. Oh, well, we'll do it. Yeah. Oh, fucking hell, do that. Thank you. What does it look like?
Oh, you got the same type, that one?
Yeah, that's mine.
Great. Just we get two presenters, they can both listen.
Okay, they'll probably want to do that.
Yeah,
debate, maybe.
yeah.
But generally, it's only
What did they say?
Yeah.
So we think the most 1 plus 1.
Most 1 plus 1, yeah.
I'll allow for a 1 plus 2. But
What we did at College Green is we did have a presenter and also Norman, and then Norman did a few clips and then back to weird. Yeah, so you can do that as well. It was Norman's territory, so he did the clips and then back to Anita on the same platform.
A lot of this, I mean, we're really for her statement of her,
The end of the vote.
The vote at 8:30 or whatever.
Yeah.
The decision is like, yeah, we've got premise, so we haven't got premise at the 10. That's what we're really targeting. At the moment, it's all,
perfect.
Okay.
It's all down there.
Oh, that's all right.
No problem.
So if it was next Saturday,
We have got the other option. It's in the country to spare part of the other one, but the others is not here yet.
come straight on Saturday or come straight on Monday.
At the moment, that's the full camera. So I was asked the full. I think that's Sky, and then there's ITN. Right. Or the other way around. This is full. No, this is full. This is the full camera here. Yeah.
Right, so audio-wise, from that one, so if we're on that, do they run out of distribution?
They will sort it out. The full camera sort it out. But if it's the BBC camera, right, then they sort it out. And they run out, and I've been able to rush the air down to the circuit.
Oh yeah, we know.
Well, no, but when we go,
So, hang on, this is the situation. Comes out, they bring distribution.
Well, I think so.
So you better unbook it then, because I told you to do this like weeks ago. I just say, well, it's your own fault, you should have
How
been
much plug in for you? Is that how it
sometimes it's a good guide, what makes it. Another spare out there. If you go back, if you ended up doing the rest of themselves, for us anyway, you could be the first second.
We can split off at...
Yeah. It's already done. So we have a cable just ready to give to whoever turns up there. So that's the same.
But hold on, what about if you can't answer the phone?
We don't really need it in one place, really.
It's one of those. Well,
just in case.
Which one will be full camera?
That will be full camera. Well, this is never the full camera.
No. So which camera am I running it to?
The full one. Yeah.
So if we do that, that is if we're picking up the audio from what source?
Well, we don't microphone. I've got there's a long this one there, which just about brings that one there. That goes to track 2.
That was the whole reason of asking. The thing is, that was the whole reason of asking him. One, you know what I mean, he didn't have the money. But two, because you know what I mean, he wanted to put every different out.
Well, they do have an AV facility.
Yeah.
This is what I thought.
Sometimes
they do, but I don't know what it is.
Sometimes it's... We just have to do it. Adding 2 sounds better than noise.
Yeah, exactly. So if I run in...
And ideally not radio mic either.
That's the thing, I mean, so no radios at all. I ain't taking it back. we've got our under trade, only under trade, so underneath the rifle boxes as well. So we've got that. Yeah, you don't get back.
So you can use that long cable as a tactic on right there.
Let's see what they've got. If they've got long leads, just stick in. Go past it. Who's running it? I'll do it, and then he never done it. So I've got to speak to him about that.
No, it's not vital for now, but we need to think about it.
Well, yeah, I'll be
later,
careful.
around the boat time. I don't know, the person doing that can
you're better off with
and then someone else will take over. It might all be a spy camera. Millbank all the time. Someone does it all the time, and Millbank uses to mobilise it, and then they'll send someone else out to take over, and then that's how it works. So I think
yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what you want, and it's the power as well you get out. You're not just getting like economy, you're getting power out as well. Yeah. Why not? As soon as you say you have a word of rebate, it's going out straight away. Did you pay extra for next day delivery? That's good though, that's pretty good. The thing is you ain't going to have to change it. When you think about it, right, one of the normal airports is like 20 something. Like a pop. So if you're buying one of them, trust me, you keep that for like 4 years. That's 80 quid you've got to spend on there. Whereas now you've got to spend half of that and take it out. But make sure, right, if you ever take it to have a service or anything done on it, or anything changed, or anything like that, right, say to them, it's got that filter, do not take it out. Because that's what Spanners done in Lake. That's what Spanners done in Lake. They took my one out and put the normal rebate on, like a shitty one. I said, yeah, I always go to the shop. He knows, that's the thing. But the thing is, I went to where's my airport? He went with me. He goes, it's in the airport. No, it's not in the airport. So I said to you, before you went off with my car, I said to you, do not forget not to take that out. Oh yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, they took it out. And he goes, oh, don't worry, I'll get it back, He rang him up and got it back. But the thing is, it's the fact that they're not taking it out, you know what I mean?
Are we expecting something from the external?
Don't know. I'm just catering for it now. It's there, then I can.
Are you going to give me a feed across it now?
Do you want the feed across it all the time? From me?
It's up to you, because then I'll have it switched
It's only
on.
really if something national happens, because otherwise you'll just be getting our interviews.
Okay,
here.
I'll just leave it as is. Just tell.
So you can leave it hanging there. I'll mark it up, Paul, and then it's ready to go. Okay. Yeah.
I'll tell you.
So if that's there, that's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. No, get mates. Get mates. It's much better. It's just much better when you get old, no? Yeah, see, I've got mine. Yeah, that's it. Well, that's the thing, because when I had mine, I took mine to go and get old road because I didn't trust what he said. But, yeah, it's fine. Fine, come out like 2, 3, 8, great. But yeah, no, so right, see how it goes. No, I'll definitely get it done at the other place. It's much better. Well, at least you know it's going to be done properly. Yeah. Booked you in for what? Because mate, you ain't ready until January, so what's the booked you in for? I was going to say, I think it's just ridiculous. It really is. No, tell me about it. No. He's stupid though. Oh well, fair enough, Yeah, yeah. But yeah, no. Is it? Yeah. It's quite funny. You know that engine I've got off Nick? Yeah, I've put it all together and everything. Like, all I've got to do is whack in the bike and start it up. So it's not even worth arguing, you know what I mean, or saying to him because he just don't listen. Yeah. We did, he just went alright, and then that was it. He just like banked off and started looking at his phone. I was like, alright, that's how it is. No, that's the thing. I'll tell you what was funny though, that I just got an engine off and afraid you could. That was funny. Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, it's 80 quid for an engine. I think it's 85. It could be 84. I haven't checked it. But yeah, I was doing some tests on it yesterday, and it seems like the engine works fine. All the ignition works fine and all that. It seems anyway. But I've got to check it to make sure. But it seems all good. So hopefully I'll whack that in quite get a game. Yeah. It's just been sitting there for 20 years. I mean, what I'll do is I'll replace the points with the contact point condenser, just for like safety. But yeah, I reckon it'll be fine. It's just a case of getting all the old crap off and all that, and basically just getting it done. But, yeah, exactly. Well, that was the thing, like literally sitting on the bench now, it's got the carb on it, the air filter, it's got the manifold, it's got everything on it. It's even got a starter, everything, full start, a lot. I went over all the contact points and all that and tested them. They seem alright, I'm not going to change them anyway, just for safety. And then, it should be just a case of fire it up and off we go. It's quite fun. But to be honest, I can understand in a way why he didn't want to use that contact. Yeah, people. Well, no, quite a few people done that, because they are difficult to get right. But the thing is, once you know how to get it right, it's not that much of a problem. You know what I mean? It's actually not that bad. But yeah, no, so hopefully, if there is a bit of a snowfall, might have tried to yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was saying this to White. Yeah, I was saying this to White. I bought him for like a Christmas and birthday present. He wanted, well, he didn't want, he sort of said that he wanted like a couple of bits of rods and shit. So what I went and done and bought him a like spod marker rod. Yeah, you know the Dominator, that Sonic Dominator. Nah, well, that's what he wanted, the Dominator stuff. So I said to him, look, I'll get you the spot and mark. At least that's like one rod up from that thing that we've got. And it's got all the real on it and braid and all that. And he's got all the marker floats and spots and all that. So that's not too bad. But yeah, we're just going to go out tomorrow and do a bit. There's nothing going on. He's got to go and get his passport done in the